With RCF Radio Lauren Nancy, we have a weekly column project, a theological column with cinema one week and Kate the next. This week, it's theology and popcorn. So, this video is a crash test. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's a good overview. And we're going to go to the studios right away for the rundown on the film Astra. I'll quickly remind you of the story. A space explorer, Roy McBride, played by Brad Pitt, who sets off to the stars to find his father and obviously save the world. Let's go. Let's start today with the title Astra. It's a reference to the Latin motto Father aspera ad astra, through difficulties to the stars. It's a summary of what a hero is in the ancient sense of the term. An ancient hero is someone who, through his bravery and sacrifice, through a tireless search for glory and hops, manages to rise above his human condition. Halfway between man and God, he reaches the sky where the gods transform him into a protective star. For example, Hercules was deified into a constellation in the sky that can still be seen today. And in the film, there is precisely one man who applied to be a hero. It is Roy McBride's father, Clifford McBride. Extraordinary for his odyssey that he led to the edge of the solar system. Adored by the rest of humanity who see him as a pioneer and an explorer, imitated by his son who embarked on space exploration after him, Clifford has literally transformed himself into a star like the heroes of old, since in the film, he now lives in orbit on Neptune. And as a Christian, I love that. The taste for adventure makes me vibrate. Wanting to live an extraordinary adventure and be a hero is something that makes sense in the gospel. Just replace the title Astra with Do Kinalum. Do Kinaltum is the phrase Jesus gave to St. Peter, who goes out into the deep. Yes, but Patatra in the film, this hero is an anti-hero. As the film progresses, we discover that Clifford is a slightly crazy mystic. He has set off to the stars to accomplish a mission that God supposedly entrusted to him, to find extraterrestrial life. He becomes a fanatic and even a murderer. We end up finding him at the end of the film disillusioned and locked in his delirium, surrounded by corpses in a ship that has become a wreck. He then reveals to us that he went into space to flee a family he has never been able to love. Not a very appealing hero. The moral of this film Astra is that the quest for heroism is a harmful quest that must be abandoned. At best, it is immaturity, at worst an escape that denotes psychological fragility. The film therefore invites us to throw away this quest for heroism and adventure and simply live where chance has put us. And here, the theologian, or even the spectator that I am, rebels. No, the search for heroism does not necessarily denote fragility and flight, whatever the film says, but can also denote a certain generosity and greatness of soul. The touchstone is humility. Yes, heroism can be dangerous, especially if it justifies a certain pride in oneself, pride in one's own destiny. But humble heroes do exist in the gospel. They are the saints and, moreover, they live in the Astra heaven. Yes, because the spectator can see in Clifford McBride more than just a hero. The references to God in the film are constant. The Father has a divine mission. He lives in the sky next to the Neptunes. He is omnipotent. From the top of his spaceship, he is able to make the weather on Earth with storms and antimatter, just as Zeus once did with his lightning. He exerts a fascination on his fellow creatures, who worship him. He is God the Father, both reassuring and disturbing. This God, who, as Freud points out, is a fantasy of protection. I quote Freud. We already know that it is the frightening feeling of helplessness in the child that arouses the desire for protection that the father fulfills, and that it is the persistence of this helplessness throughout life that brings us closer to the existence of a father, but now more powerful. To put it more simply, religions are born because we need to be reassured. This need was fulfilled by our Father when we were children. And the child that we are growing up invents a new, more powerful and more reassuring father in the film Clifford in the Religion's God. For Freud, as in the film, it is necessary to symbolically kill this illusory God and replace him with a God logos. In other words, the God of reason. Roy in the film does almost the same thing. He symbolically kills his father Clifford and lets him commit suicide. And from the moment his father commits suicide, Roy can once again cry, love, and feel emotions. But then, after cutting the biliary cord with his father, symbolized in the film by a rope, Roy does not go looking for a God logos. Roy renounces a form of transcendence. He leaves the sky and the stars. He returns to Earth at the end of the film because there's nothing else to seek and decides to love his neighbor. Here's the last sentence of the film. I am ready, calm, I sleep well, no bad dreams, and I am going to live and love. And we see Roy reaching out to men. What can we say from a Christian perspective? Some have seen this as a criticism of religion. You are the Father, you are God. Others, on the contrary, see it as a return to a more authentic Christianity. Seeking Jesus in our neighbors and not in the stars. And in fact, we can say both. What is certain, however, is that the image of a falsely reassuring God who must be symbolically killed in order to grow is not the image of God that Jesus gave us. I quote Matthew chapter 25. It is like a man who went on a journey. He called his servants and entrusted his possessions to them, and then he went away. In the Gospel, God the Father goes away. So yes, he will return to judge. But in the meantime, the moral of the Gospel is that we must take our responsibilities and not hide behind God. Of course, God consoles us through prayer and providence, but it is to allow us to take risks and remain charitable, even in times of persecution, that's all. Except for a childish desire for protection. I bet that if you are Catholic, you have never heard of the cult of Doulet. However, it is something that you may even practice often. The cult of Doulet, as opposed to the cult of latria reserved for God, is the homage that a believer pays to the breast by praying to them. These are the devotions. Devotion to the Virgin Mary, devotion to Saint Anthony of Padua to find what is lost, devotion to Saint Rita for lost causes. Neither adoration, nor magic, nor idolatry. The cult of Doulet is a prayer of intercession. It amounts to asking the saint, so to speak, to give us a helping hand with God. And we can think what we want about the help we give, but it works. So, Catholic devotions in the film Astra. I'll start with a quote from Colonel Stroh. In the film, this colonel is a sort of grandfather, a sort of guardian for Roy McBride. He introduces himself by saying, I am your guardian angel. Devotion to guardian angels is present in the film. This devotion finds its justification in a word from Jesus. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, their angels in heaven continually see the face of my Father. That is why, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the existence of guardian angels is a truth of faith. But that's not all. In the film, when Troy McBride boards the spaceship that is to take him to Mars, the crew leader begins his journey with a prayer to Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travelers. O Saint Christopher, protect me today in all my travels, and so on. Devotion to Saint Christopher comes from a legend. One day, after converting to Christ, the giant Reprobus sees a child near a stream. He takes him in his arms and helps him cross the stream. It was Christ. This led to his nickname of Christopher, the one who carries Christ. And there is one last allusion to Catholic devotions in the film. The captain's prayer to Saint Christopher was not answered and he died during the voyage. A member of his crew then closed his eyes and he did so while reciting a prayer that is traditionally recited during absolution. A prayer called In Paradisum de Duc Angeli. I will recite the beginning. May the angels lead you to paradise, may the martyrs welcome you on your arrival and introduce you to the Jerusalem of heaven, and so on. It is a very beautiful prayer and it is a pleasure to hear it in the film. This tradition that sees angels as guides for our souls in the afterlife comes from Jesus again. In the parable of poor Lazarus, Jesus says that after his death, the angels took his soul to Abraham's bosom. Yes, Colonel Strout presents himself as a guardian angel, but he proves incapable of protecting Roy in times of danger. It is Roy who must protect him. The captain of the shuttle recites a prayer to Saint Christopher to be warned in case of danger. But despite Roy's warnings, he dies in an absurd rescue operation. In a misunderstanding, the entire crew dies, replaced by Roy. In short, all those who have religious devotion in the film are portrayed as a sort of backward Boy Scout full of good intentions but who end up becoming burdens that Roy drags around. Through these characters, religion appears in the film as a touching naivety in the case of Colonel Strout, ineffective in the case of the crew members and even dangerous in the case of Roy's father. And yet, the film is quite subtle because how can you not love them despite everything and not find poetry in these Boy Scouts and what they embody? Through his wisdom, Colonel Strout makes Roy aware of the political and emotional stakes of the voyage. The crew loves their job, loves the beauty of space and shows Roy the way to follow. And his father, well his father after all, has also accomplished great feats. Conversely, Roy the hero is nothing like the Boy Scout. But what charm would he have if he wasn't played by Brad Pitt? His quest takes him to the edge of the universe but ends up as a rat in the packrets. A bit skeptical and disillusioned, Roy is ultimately a man whose only challenge at 50 is to mourn his father and who makes the ultimately bourgeois drama of his childhood seem like the size of the universe. We get the point. I'm skeptical about the moral lessons this film gives us. Even if their freshness borders on the ridiculous, the caricature or the madness, for my part, I choose the camp of the Boys Sue. I think of this maxim of La Rochefoucauld: he who lives without madness is not as wise as he thinks. Or St. Paul, if any of you thinks he is wise in the manner of this world, let him become mad to become wise. And while I have to express my skepticism, I will make the same observation about the way this film talks about space exploration. Why explore the universe? The film asks us to leave the superficiality of an earthly life. But when Roy lands on the moon, the first thing he sees is a shopping mall. I must admit that it is well seen. So, why go off to look for new resources? But that will only export war and greed like this pirate attack on the moon. There too, a very successful scene by the way, to discover new horizons. But the only thing the universe has to show us in the film is lifeless expanses for adventure. But that's just an escape from oneself. Ultimately, this film is about space exploration, which is curious because, after all, the beauty of this film lies precisely in the poetry of space and its exploration. Yes, Astra tells the story of how the hero Roy was abandoned by his father and how Roy ends up healing from this abandonment. And the film chooses to describe this healing, this resilience, using the narrative framework of space exploration. Roy who plunges into the depths of space is Roy who plunges into the depths of his emotional traumas. So personally, I think that telescoping a family drama into the stars is always a risky bet that works when everything doubles. Or it allows this drama to have an epic scope and the universe to have a moral resonance, and that's the jackpot. Or it reduces the dimensions of the universe to the size of a bourgeois microcosm and you've ruined everything. The viewer will decide for himself as to its Astra. That said, I recognize that Roy's resilience is told in the film in a very structured way. As a theologian, I don't have much to comment on, but I take notes on the major steps in this process of resilience. At the beginning, the film tells us that Roy is in free fall. Both physically, he falls from a giant antenna, and his wife actually leaves him. He is a lonely man whose unfailing composure, the cold blood that has made his professional reputation, actually denotes an emotional coldness. There is something disembodied about this man, an inability to identify with his own story. And so, we go to the stars to heal from it. During the journeys, Roy's voiceover takes control of his own life and immerses us in a sort of psychoanalysis session, all against a starry backdrop. It begins with the refusal to make his problems the center of the universe. And Roy saves the world rather than wallow in the failure of his marriage. Then, psychological support, here with Colonel Stroh. Then, the masks are revealed in an abandoned space laboratory. Roy comes face to face with a rabid monkey and realizes the rage that lies dormant within him. Then, we continue with his desire to regain control of his life. Roy takes the place of the crew that leaves for Mars, for Neptune. Then, at the end of the journey and the crucial stage of reconciliation, he accepts the truth in order to forgive. His father tells him, "I never loved you." And Roy replies, "I know, but I love you anyway." Reconciliation may not be completely achieved, sometimes it is not possible. In any case, Roy can turn the page and heal. His father sinks into the depths of space. Roy can once again experience emotions, anger, sadness, love. All of this is well crafted. Perhaps a bit heavy-handed in terms of the script, but psychologically well crafted and admirably well acted by Brad Pitt.